I'm Joe Reingold, and I'm interviewing Susan Schackman today, and it is still June 12th, 2020. Hi, Susan. Good morning.
Good morning.
So, tell me a little bit about what you know of your family, your relatives from way back, whatever you know about your grandparents, your parents, where they lived, where they grew up, what they did for a living, etc.
Okay. My father's family came from Poland. Um, my grandfather came in 1913 on the Kassel ship. He left from Bremen. He came in through Galveston. From there, he went to Fort Worth, and it was funny, I didn't hear this until much later on in my life. He lived in a rooming house, and he worked in a hog factory. And my grandfather was strictly kosher. So he would come home, and the house he lived in was a kosher home. And she would leave a bucket of water outside for him. And when he would come home from work, he would take the bucket and pour it over the top of his head to get all of the blood off of him before he could go in the house.
Oh, boy.
That was in 1913. And then he moved to Waco in 1919. And he was a tailor by trade. And that's when he sent for my grandmother and my uncle, aunt, and my father. And they came in 1920.
How did they pick Waco? Do you know?
He had a friend that he knew from this town that he lived in. And so that's where he went.
Okay.
And that's all I know. There may have been other reasons, but my grandparents really didn't talk about anything later on. Whenever we would ask, the answer was always, we live for today. This is our life now.
Okay.
But the story that my aunt all told about when they came to the United States, they were on the Amsterdam, and they left out of Rotterdam. So I asked how they got to Rotterdam, and she said, well, they walked, or they got on the back of a cart that was going as far as they would go. And they got to the ship right before it was ready to sail. And my grandfather had sent them a ticket for an actual room on the cabin on the ship, which they had gotten there so late that they had given it away. So they said, you can either go on and go steerage, or you can wait 2 weeks for the next ship. And my grandmother said, no, we're out of here. So they got on, and immediately they realized that my father had the measles.
Oh, boy.
So they put them into quarantine in a cabin, which lasted the entire trip. And he got better by the day before they landed at Ellis Island. And my grandfather met them there, and then they came back to Waco. And then 10 months later, they had their last child. Mm-hmm. My mother's family is from Romania. They came in 1903. They came through Ellis Island. They went to St. Louis. Why they went to St. Louis, I don't know. And then from there, they went to San Antonio, which is where my mother was born. When they came from Romania, they were on the Rio, I believe. The Rio Negro was the name of the ship. And they ended up in San Antonio, where my mother and two of her sisters were born. In St. Louis, I think she had two brothers that were born there, and then the others were all born in Romania. There were 9 of them in all. From there, they moved to Dallas. My grandfather was a carpenter, and he had a workshop out in the back of their house. They lived 3500 Cleveland was one of the houses in South Dallas, and the other one was on Colonial. The one on Cleveland's the only one I actually remember. And he also worked for the train station. No, not train, the bus station. And so he drove a bus also. My mother taught Sunday school at Temple Emmanuel. although her father went to the old Rumänische Schule in South Dallas. Mother said it was all, they were always scared to death of it because they had to go up dark staircase to it. So they all joined the temple. And that was their, then when Mother and Daddy got married, they lived in Waco. And then they moved, my father, well, I guess when they first got married, they moved to Port Arthur. And Daddy worked for Glazer's, a liquor company. Then they moved to San Antonio, and that's where my sister was born. And then to Austin, which is where I was born. And then they moved to Waco, back to Waco, which is where we lived until I was 16. And then we moved back to Austin.
What was life like where you were growing up, and what did you do for
Well,
amusement? What did you like to do?
Waco, had a very small Jewish community. It was very close Jewish communities. So all of our friends really were connected with the synagogue. I was active in Young Judea. We did not. The synagogue had Young Judea, and the temple had temple teens. And never the twain should meet. So we were really a very close conservative group of kids. And really I didn't know many of the kids from temple until I went to college. But there was one or two that I was friendly with because by then my father worked for Levine's, and there were several of them whose parents also worked for Levine's. But it was a really close-knit group of kids. There were few of us, so we all just kind of hung out together. Nobody knew any, those who were wealthy and those who were not just kind of did the same things.
What did you excel in when you were growing up?
Oh, golly. I was always doing acting on the front porch. I put on many plays. One of my favorite subjects in school was speech. I was on the debate team. And those were my favorite things to do.
Mm-hmm. So tell us, what did you do after high school?
After high school, I went to the University of Texas, and then I got married. I only went to Texas for a year, and I was in the sorority at SDT. And then I got married in 1965. I graduated high school in 1964, and I got married in 1965. But the funny thing about when Joe and I met, we had a blind date in Dallas. I was here visiting relatives. And when I told my mother that I had a date with somebody called Joe Schackman, and she said, "Joe Schackman, I wonder if he's any kin to Old Man Schackman." I had no idea who Old Man Schackman was. So I asked him the next night when we went out, and he said, "Oh, well, that was my great-grandfather." It turns out that his great-grandfather and my grandfather were both carpenters and were friends. And my grandfather actually died very young. And after he died, Old Man Schackman tried to date my grandmother. And she would take all of her children and hide in the closet when she would see him coming down the street. So I said, well, it was a good thing that they didn't get together.
That's funny. Was your family a member of any other organization growing up, or were you involved in anything else growing up?
The main thing I was involved in was Young Judea and a couple of things at school. Mother and Daddy were very active at the Goodness Jacob, which was the synagogue in Waco, and then also in Austin. I wasn't, because I was like 16. We moved. I was in the end of the 10th grade when I moved there, and then I was, Daddy was active in B'nai B'rith. Mother was active in B'nai B'rith women. My father was and also very active at the synagogue, Agudas Achim in Austin. When Agudas Achim moved into their new synagogue on Bull Creek, they had arranged for Vice President at the time, Vice President Lyndon Johnson, to come and dedicate the synagogue. He and Jim Novy were very, very good friends. and Jim was president of the synagogue at the time. Of course, when he was supposed to come was the weekend that LBJ and JFK were in Dallas, and then they were going to go to the ranch, and then Johnson was going to come dedicate the synagogue in Austin. Of course, things changed after Kennedy was shot here, but President Johnson came as president and dedicated our synagogue. Oh. And my father was on that committee. There's a plaque at the synagogue in Austin with Daddy's name on it about about him being on that committee.
Oh, wow, that's exciting.
It was very exciting, actually.
Tell me about your early married life. Where did you guys live? What did you do? Did you have a job, or what were your activities like when you were early?
Lived in an apartment on Spring Valley. I worked as a secretary at Associates Discount Corporation, and Joe was still in school, and also worked after school at Zales. And I always laugh. I said we had like 50 cents left every month at the end of the month in our bank account. The kids were laughing one day. I was cleaning out some stuff, and they said, "Why do you have old checks to 7-Eleven every week?" And I said, "Well, that was our money for the weekend. That's what we had to spend every weekend. We would cash a check. We would do whatever we could do on $10. But it was really a nice life. We had several friends that lived either across the street. Then Joe went into the Army Reserves. I went to Waco basic training, and I moved in with my in-laws. Never thought about keeping the apartment. I guess it was just a different time. Mm-hmm. So,
did you have any children at that point?
No. We hadn't even been married a year.
Okay.
Then when he came back, I quit my job, went with him to Virginia for his supposed to have been 4 months of schooling. It ended up we were only there about 6 weeks. But it was very interesting. We did a lot of traveling around the country there, just, sightseeing. One of the interesting things about that, and shows you how naive and young we were, I used to take him to the base every day because we were young and stupid. We didn't think to bring the registration for the car, and all of that stuff was here in Dallas in the safety deposit box. Didn't park on the base. So I would take him every morning and then come back and pick him up every night. But it was interesting one day, waiting for him to come, be through. And this young man came and knocked on the window, and he said, "I apologize. I'm really not trying to pick you up. To be from Waco, do you?" And I said, "Yes." And he was a boy that I had gone all through elementary and junior high school with. And he was getting ready the next day, and he said, "I've seen you sitting here, and every day I keep trying to get up enough nerve to come see if that was really you." So
you were his send-off. That's nice.
Yeah, it was kind of a fun thing. And then we came back to Dallas after that, and our first child was born in 1967. Joe was working as a stockbroker then. And then he went back to work for Zales for a while, and then into the scrap business. Our second son was born in 1970. We moved into this house and then our daughter was born in 1972. I helped to start during all that time Israel, and also very active in the Council of Jewish Women, the Richardson branch. And we started, and in fact, I was co-chairman of the thing that started Family Outreach, which was a child abuse center with Child Protective Services of Dallas.
Is that what has evolved into CASA, or is that something different?
No, CASA, I believe there are still a couple of family outreach programs still around. I'm not positive. story. My mother and father were here visiting, and we were trying to think of a name, and thought, well, we'd have some kind of a contest within the high schools. So I had left a message for Roger Staubach and see if maybe he would donate some tickets to Dallas Cowboys for the winter. And Mother and Daddy were here visiting. All of a sudden, the phone rings, and I was doing something. Daddy answered the phone, and he comes back into the bed where I was, and he says, and he's pointing to the phone, and he's mouthing Roger Staubach. So my esteem went way up in Daddy's eyes that here Roger Staubach was calling me. I saw him at an AJC meeting not too long ago, and we talked about that. He said, yeah, I remember doing that. So that was kind of that took up a lot of time.
Mm-hmm. What achievement or project are you extremely proud of in your life?
Well, that, for one thing, the family outreach thing. The other is I started a business in 1982, I believe it was, 81, I think. Susan Schackman Catering, which I worked at for 28 years. So I was very proud of that. And mainly, I'm very proud of our children and our family. We have a very close-knit family. That's how both Joe and I were both raised that way. Family was very important. It still is. We are still very close to all of our first cousins. And so I think that's really probably the thing that I am most proud of, is the way our family sticks together no matter what.
That's wonderful. Tell me, how has your family grown? I understand you have some grandchildren around.
We do. Our our oldest son has 2 children, a daughter, 22, is our one and only granddaughter. Then he has a son that is 18 and just graduated from L.D. Bell High School and is going to University of Texas in the engineering department. And hopefully school will start. In fact, he just sent me a text the other day showing me his new schedule for the fall. And as I told him, I certainly am glad it's you taking it, because I have no idea what these classes are. Then our second son has 2 children, a son who is 17, and he is going to be a senior at Green Hill, and a son who is 14, who is in the 9th grade at Green Hill. And then we have a daughter who just got married last June. In fact, her first anniversary is coming up on the 22nd, and they have no children yet.
Mazel tov.
But the best thing about all of that is that they all live here.
Right. I was just going to say that you were quite lucky in that regard.
We are. And
speaking of living here, my next question is about Dallas, in a way. What was Dallas like when you first got here, and how has it changed today? And also, the Jewish community, what was it like when you first moved to Dallas, and has it changed now, currently?
Well, when I moved here, of course, I was working, and so I wasn't as involved. I mean, we belonged to Sheriff Israel, and I belonged to the Sisterhood. I also belonged to my in-laws, and my husband's grandmother and grandfather were very active in Save a Life. So I was, which was City of Hope. So I was also a life member of that. But mainly it was involved with working, and we went to services sometimes. Everything was built around my in-laws. We had Friday night dinner at their house every Friday night until after the kids got older. But it was a fairly close-knit community. Most of our friends, in fact, almost all of our friends, were friends that I either knew from college or Joe knew growing up, and I knew from college, which I think is unusual now. And I'm not sure it's still the same in today's world. People that we are friendly with now are people that were in our wedding. So I think that's one way things have changed. Dallas has become more spread out. I don't think that they are quite as close as the Jewish community used to be, but I guess that's part of not living, everyone not living in close proximity as they used to.
Mm-hmm. That's true. If somebody was going to consider moving to Dallas at this point in time, what would be some positive points that you would tell them about?
Positive. I love Dallas. I don't think I would really live anywhere else. I love the atmosphere. I love there's this can-do attitude that has always been around in Dallas that or so I perceive. People are friendly. I'm not sure it's quite the same as it was when I moved here. I mean, the synagogues have all become great big, and now, hey, there was Shearith Israel and Tifereth and Temple Emmanuel,
Mm-hmm.
and that was about it. Now there are so many, and I guess actually because there are so many, it may be easier for people to make friends in a smaller congregation. So I think that's kind of a plus also. But I think the housing here, the affordability of housing here, the job opportunities here, I think are great. It's one of my favorite places. We've traveled a lot, but we're always glad to come home.
What organizations are you involved in right now that you strongly support?
Well, Dallas Jewish Historical Society, I'm on the board of that. I am a life member of Shearith Israel Sisterhood. Also, not necessarily, we're also members of the American Jewish Committee, APAC, but also I'm involved at the Dallas Arboretum. I did do until the pandemic came, a lot of volunteering out there. We also are very active at Jewish Family Service. So we keep busy.
Yeah, I was going to mention the Arboretum if you didn't.
I love it. It's one of my favorite places, and that is something that I always tell people too. It is a wonderful place to go and forget all of your troubles.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
Go and just relax and enjoy the beauty.
Okay, so here's a cerebral question for you. Who do you think, if anybody, was your role model growing up?
I guess my mother and father, probably. My father, it's interesting. My mother and father were totally opposite. My father was very easygoing. If ever I had a problem, that's who I went to. My mother was much more focused and rigid in things. But they both were extremely good people and lived that way. There was a right way to do things, and that's what you did. They were very interesting people. My father had gone bankrupt, and yet he worked very hard and came back from all of that. My mother, even though she was working a lot, also was very active. She taught Sunday school up until, golly, I guess probably in Waco she did the whole time that I can remember, and in Austin she did even till after I got married. So, their faith in each other and faith in our religion and in the community at large.
Wonderful. This question, a lot of people say family, and that's fine. But if there's anything else, let me know. What are you the most proud of? You can say family, but then you can say anything.
My family really, and like I said, helping to start this family outreach child abuse thing was really big. We were in the paper all the time. It was a really wonderful organization.
Did you ever, you said you were thinking of naming it, but did you ever specifically get a name for it, or what was it?
Yes, it's called Family Outreach. That was the name. And what we did was we had this contest in the school system, in the high schools.
Mhm.
and through the art department. And they came up with a logo. And the one we picked, it was a hand, and it was family. It was the hand was the symbol of the family.
Okay.
And they did get tickets to Cowboy games from Roger.
Wow.
But I think those were probably, and my business, as I said before. Really, I was very proud of the fact that I always used to laugh that my money that I made from my business kind of went through my bank account and waved as it went on the way to, it was our kids spending money and money in college.
That's great.
So, yeah, it just kind of waved at my checking account and kept going.
It's still something to be very proud of.
It is. And I am.
Yeah. Is there anything else, Susan, that you'd like to add that we didn't cover or that you want to tell us about?
I guess another thing that I really have enjoyed was our 2 trips. So we have traveled a lot, and we've been very fortunate in that regard. And I guess my 2 favorite trips, when we were totally different, both to Israel. One was we went with Jack Mullah. It was the only time he took an adult group.
Wow.
And there were only 10 of us. And we were actually in Israel for 2 weeks and living it through his eyes as someone who grew up there was one of the most amazing experiences. And I think back about it all the time, and I talk about it all the time, as one of, I guess, reinforcement of my belief in Israel and its how important it is for Israel to exist. The other trip back to Israel was through Federation, which was also a wonderful trip, but totally different.
Mm-hmm.
And those were probably 2 of my favorite trips that we have ever taken. Or I shouldn't say favorite, they're my most meaningful trips that we have taken.
Mm-hmm. That's fantastic. Jack Mullah, by the way, I interviewed him and he mentioned that trip.
Did he really?
Yes. He's
Well,
so fond of it. Yeah.
Well, it was a great, great trip. And it was a really neat, there were only, as I say, there were only 10 of us. And it was really a fabulous, fabulous trip.
Yeah. Well, I thank you so much for your time. It's been wonderful and very interesting from the eyes of someone who grew up in a small town coming to the big city. We really appreciate your perspective.
Thank you very much. I enjoyed it also.
Okay, take care.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.